T.J. Martin, Martin, born November 10, 1929.
November 10?
Yeah. Clover, South Carolina.
November 10, 29. South Carolina. What is TJ?
That's it.
Huh?
Like I tell people, it was a depression, and they couldn't afford to give me a big name.
So
it's just initials.
Just initial, but
right.
You don't have any spelled out name.
No name.
T.J. Martin.
Just T.J.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that would be an original, but I've run into other people with the same identical situation.
But it's not you that give that simple name, T.J. It was your parents during the
right.
Depression, right?
They gave me an option later to add Thomas Jackson.
Aha.
But that was an awful lot of writing, and I didn't like it.
Tell me about the place that you were growing.
When I was born and growing up.
Yeah.
I grew up in the Depression. It started that very same year. I think it was like October when the crash came.
Uh-huh.
And my dad he had a job. He was working 55 hours a week for $4.50.
54 hours for what?
For $4.50. And that job shut down, and he had to work in cemeteries and whatever he could do, and we grew. We actually grew most of what we ate. We scrounged it in the woods or wherever we could find it. But we survived, considering the circumstances real well, because there were no luxuries in those days. Electric power we didn't have. We had kerosene. We had no inside plumbing. So therefore we didn't have any overhead expenses except a small, about a monthly rent of $100 a month for a house we lived in. And so it was very economical in the sense of the word. And gasoline prices were like 15 cents a gallon in those days. And as time went on, I grew into before 10 years old, I was out picking up junk and selling it to scrap dealers. And the older people who had lived through World War I were telling me that was all being shipped to Japan, and it would later be shot back at us, and sure enough, they were right. And so today we're doing exactly the opposite. I mean, the same thing. We're selling our junk to the Chinese, and they're going to be shooting it back at us. But in any case, I went through that part and lived through the Depression, and when World War II came along, things began to get better. And at the end of World War II, I had finished high school and had already gone to work when I was 13 at 10 cents an hour.
Hold on. What school did you go through? Was it in South Carolina?
Oh, yes.
What is the town name? Spell it.
Clover, South Carolina, C-L-O-V-E-R.
C-L-O-V-E-R.
South Carolina. And I went there 6 years, and it was an outstanding school. And I transferred to York, South Carolina, and that school was so far behind that I had already accomplished most of what they had in high school. I graduated there in 1947. And so 1948, I enrolled for college, and Truman, our president.
What college?
The first college was Spartanburg Junior College in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Could you spell it?
Spartan, S-P-A-R-T-A-N-B-U-R-G, South Carolina, Spartanburg Junior College, and I was going from there to the University of South Carolina to acquire my law degree. But that very year, Harry Truman, our president, had a law passed called the Universal Military Training Act.
Universal
Military Training Act. And if you
what year was it?
That was 1948. And he said that if you were 18 to age 26, that you were subject to the draft to go in for 21 months and then take 4 years National Guard. And I had an option. I had graduated high school, so I could volunteer for 1 year, take 6 years in the inactive reserves, and I would have it made. I could go back to school. Well, I took my 1 year. I made that, and I was released from the military into the inactive reserves, and I had then to start trying to get the money up to go to school. And so I didn't enroll that first year. I planned to enroll in the second year, but the Korean War started in the summer of 1950. 53, and so
No,
did-
50.
1950, and June the 25th, 1950. And so they invited me to come and join you over there.
What an invitation, right?
An invitation to come to Korea. But I thought, well, I had turned down a commission twice while I was in the first time, that I'd go get my commission and delay things a bit. But they found that I was needed quickly over there, so they sent me to Japan. And
When did you leave for Japan?
I left on the 10th day of November, which was my birthday, in San Francisco,
1950.
1950, and went to Yokohama.
Mm-hmm.
And I was stationed at Fort Drake.
Mm-hmm.
I was there approximately 2 weeks, and we were transported to Incheon, Korea.
When did you leave for Korea? Do you remember the day?
I think I landed in Korea on December the 6th of 1950.
December 6th.
Yeah, I believe that was the right date, December the 6th. I kept dates up.
Okay. Before we go into the detail, did you know anything about Korea before you left the United States?
Well, I actually did, in as much as the war had started, and there had been quite a bit of publicity, about the troops that we had there from 1945 to 1950 patrolling the parallel,
Yeah.
and were being shot at quite a bit, but not allowed to return fire. And of course, I was aware when the war took place there, but it was insignificant
Right.
location in the world so far as global history. I mean, global geography.
Yeah.
I knew all the nations in the world when I was in grammar school,
Yeah.
but Korea, of course, at that time didn't put anything of any consequence in my memory. So it just enlarged it right quick, and I became much aware of the circumstance. Of course, I was aware of the fact that when the war was over with Japan, the Russians had not taken apart
Right.
in World War II, but when they saw that we dropped a bomb in Hiroshima and so forth, they decided they wanted to get in, and so they moved in and took the upper portion of North Korea.
Exactly.
And Franklin Roosevelt conceded to let them hold that, and we later solved this matter and joined the two back together.
Actually, Franklin Roosevelt invited Stalin to do so.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
And did the same thing in Germany when we divided Germany. All of that, I have a history. I mean, I have a big scrapbook at home that I made on all this about Korea and about at the end of 1945, when the war was over. And so I've got all that on historical record in my books. But that's where I had an advantage on most of the troops that went to Korea.
Yeah. Were you scared that you are going to the war?
I never did have any fear.
Never?
Never had any fear.
Be honest with me.
Well, I'm going to put it to you straight. A soldier is worthless by the time he's 25 years old. He thinks he's invincible.
Uh-huh.
You can't kill him. But once he gets past 25, 30 years old, and you put him in a foxhole, he holds the gun up and pulls the trigger like that. The same thing applies when he grows up here until he's about 35. If he has a chest pain, until then, it'll go away. After that, it's going to be a heart attack. He becomes paranoid.
Tell me about the day that you arrived in Incheon, December 6th. Tell me, what did you see? Tell me about everything that you can think of now.
Well, I'll tell you about it from daylight till dark. That morning, I'd been told, as on my way from Japan, you will smell Korea before you ever see it. I said, you got to be kidding. So the morning that we were to arrive in the harbor, they woke me up about 4 o'clock and took me up on deck. I said, what in the world's going on? I could see some rocks, out in the water, but there was no land I could see. That's Korea, they said. You smell it, don't you? I said, yes, I do.
4 in the morning?
4 in the morning, and before daylight, I could smell Korea. Anyway, we landed in Incheon Harbor at high tide, and we got on LST, and we went to the shore, and we got off on the beach there, and they began to call out names. And when they got through calling out names, there was 4 of us standing there that had no names. So we started looking around for a boat to go back to Japan. I said, if they don't know we're here, we'll just go back home. So anyway, some lieutenant walked up and wanted to know who we were, and we gave him our names and so forth, and wanted to know what our qualifications were, and, oh, we need you right up front. So they took us and put us on a train to go to Seoul.
Yeah.
Took us 5 days. We were ambushed at least 10 times on the way up to Seoul
Even in December?
in December of 1950.
You know, they landed in Incheon September 15th, and they mostly cleared the enemies around the way up to Seoul.
Yeah, but we were there about 9 days before that. We were there on the 6th of December.
Right.
And the first group that I was supposed to leave with on the train, I was to get off the train that morning at 5 o'clock, and I missed that group, and there was 35 of them. And when I finally found out what happened that morning, they had been ambushed just outside of the little place where we got where the train stopped, and every one of them was killed. I was lucky there. So then we managed 5 days later, we arrived at Seoul, and I walked down the street of Seoul, and it's hard to believe that anybody would see Seoul as it is today as opposed to then. But anyway, I walked down the streets of Seoul, and we got on trucks, and we went up to an area near Panmunjom, where I met the troops coming back from the Chosin Reservoir. My company had 8 survivors, and I was a replacement.
What unit did you belong? What division?
When I landed on the beach, I was in the 7th Cav Division.
7th Cavalry?
7th Cavalry out of Yokohama at Fort Drake. But when I landed on the beach, they transferred me to the 38th Infantry Regiment
38th
of the
Infantry.
2nd Division, which I had been a part of the 2nd Division previously when I was in the service before.
So what happened to you at the Panmunjom when you went up to there from Seoul?
That first night, I got 8 people who survived the reservoir, and they're telling me what a carnage it was up there.
Oh, you met the soldiers who came down from reservoir?
My company was supposed to be 108. There was only 8 of them left, and I was one of the replacements for the 100 missing. They started telling the stories about how bad it was up there. And I turned to them, I said, I would have done so-and-so. They said, you'll get your chance. And I did.
What do they say? Tell me about their story in Tianjin.
Most of them were killed, you see, at the reservoir. They didn't get captured. And I don't know of any of that particular company that actually survived at all. In other words, those 100 were probably all killed at the reservoir.
So then what happened to you?
Well, we started making movement, trying to go north, and we actually started being pushed back. And they pushed us back. Somebody told me it was south of the parallel. And we were at a place called Hongsong.
Hongsong?
Hongsong, on the Hongsong River. We'd go up, back up, go up, back up. And I was one of the people that went on the patrols out into the enemy territory and select information and come back and so forth. And sometimes I'd go out and come back, they weren't there. I had to try to find them further south and get myself back into the units. And so finally at Hongsong, we had the massacre.
I know. Tell me about it. When was it?
That was on February the 11th and 12th. As a matter of fact,
February 11th and 12th.
I had
of
been
1951.
Yeah. I had just come back from a patrol out in front of the 8th Rock Division, come back through there, and come back to my unit, which was a headquarters unit about 8 miles behind them. And I set up a tent, and I had a switchboard that was taking care of all the telecommunications through back to the regimental headquarters.
Was that your specialty? Signal Corps?
Well, I learned it after I got there. They taught me after I got there.
What is your
I was really a mechanic.
Mechanic?
I was a mechanic, and when I joined the 2nd Division 38th Infantry Regimental Combat Team, a guy was standing on a hill. He said, "Is there anybody out here can fix a Model A Ford?" Well, my uncle had been in the service World War II. He said, "You don't volunteer for anything." He said, "They'll find something you don't want to do."
Right.
So anyway, I sauntered up behind him, and I said, "I don't see any Model A Fords out here, but I says, I know how to fix them." He said, "Well, if you can fix a Model A Ford," said, "you can fix telephones and switchboards." He said, we can teach you. So I joined him. He cut my papers. I'd been moved around 3 or 4 times before I got to that point. So he put me into that operation, and what I did, I carried communications out into patrol areas and then regimental and battalion operation. But at that particular point, we were spearheading. We had a spearhead coming up on the right-hand side. We were going up on the left-hand side. We were going to meet in about 3 days. We were moving 3 miles a day. And we had moved about, 12 miles, something like that, when they were coming down behind us. We'd captured a captain. He told us, he said, you're just going up there. We're letting you go through. But we didn't believe him. At least my colonel didn't. And so on about the night of the 11th, I believe it was night of the 11th, I'm sitting in my switchboard, and the colonel who was in charge of the 8th Rock Division called me. He says, alert everybody. He says, I have 500 Chinamen just came through the line. So I alerted everybody, got them all up. And about half an hour or so, he called me back. He said, I've closed up the line. We're cleaning it up. I said, I'm looking at tracer fire right down here, and I'm 8 miles behind you. I said, you're not cleaning up too well. So then I called regiment. They said, well, hold the line. Well, it's still dark. They're running through us just like ants all night. We don't know who to shoot and who not to shoot. By daylight, we were shooting them down, and they were coming at us just like flies.
Chinese.
They must have been 10,000 of them.
Chinese?
Chinese. And they were coming over top of the mountain, snow. I could see them coming over. The first one had a rifle. The second one had 2 hand grenades. The third one had nothing. And we shot the first one down. The second one got the rifle. The third one got the hand grenades and the rifle, and just kept coming. We shot them down with quad 50s, piled them up all day long on the 12th. And so the regiment called me sometime late that afternoon, said, tell everybody to do a strategic withdrawal. You're going to stay where you are, burn up your equipment, and start withdrawing down this road. Only one way out of there. And we were met by the 7th Division to cover us while we came through in strategic withdrawal. Well, we started out at dark. I'm the last man to come out. I've got a machine gun with only 1 box of ammunition, rear guard. But the last driver coming through was a lieutenant, and he knew me, and he hauled up on the mountain and said, Martin, you still got that machine gun? I said, yes, sir. He says, can I have it? I said, with my blessing. So I come down and put it on his Jeep. I said, well, now, can I catch a ride with you? We were the last Jeep in the column. As we started down through there, we put our gas truck, our fuel truck, in front. They blew it up. Mm-hmm. That blocked the road. Our troops was hitting the ditches on foot. We had still 1 tank behind us. The other tank was in front. He'd blocked the road because the driver had been killed. And the last tank decided he would come up the ditch. Mm-hmm. Now it's dark. And I'm sitting here in the road, and he's just running over them with that tank. They were screaming and hollering, our own troops now, crushing them with that tank. Anyway, he gets on down the road, and he drops off of a hillside and turned it upside down. So we dropped into a ditch, 2 of us, about 10 of us, and a sergeant was laying there. It was dark, and there was a machine gun sitting up just about like up on top of that cabinet there, shooting right down over us. I don't know why I never threw a grenade, but a sergeant dropped in the hole with me and said, hey, Martin, says, there's only one way out of here, says, we got to banzai that machine gun. We ran over top of it like that. It was 10, he jumped up, about 8 jumped up between me and him, and only 2 of us got to the other side of it. That's where they reported me dead. So we went down the ditch down through here, and we came to a culvert where you could go under the road. The trucks are still lined up, all stopped there. And that's where the massacre took place. I mean, they killed thousands there. And I've got pictures. The Chinese killed us. They had machine guns set up about
How many died?
Oh, I don't know, probably 2,400 of us. I've got a history on it. I've got pictures of it. See, actually, the pictures I have that were made by the U.S. Air Force, they came in, and the vehicles we could not destroy, they burned them right behind me as I moved on south. They came in and burned those vehicles.
So the picture taken by the U.S. Air Force?
I've got those
and
pictures.
And you have those?
Yes, I have.
Did you write it?
No, I didn't. I have a friend who did this work because he came up after I was captured. He came up for the cleanup, and he was there right after all this took place. See, our troops retook the area about 3 weeks later, and he came up there, and the dead were still there. And, of course, the Air Force had destroyed the trucks because the Chinamen were taking as many as they could back north. Matter of fact, they wanted me to drive one. I would not do it. They took our howitzers, our gun. They didn't take them up to fight back with us. They took them to China to put them in parades.
So 2,400 died.
I would say somewhere in that neighborhood, right there in that one area. But we had lost many before that, the day before.
I know.
They had killed a lot of them.
So what happened after that?
Well, as I went into this culvert, the other guy, he went to the other side. He sort of checked out backside. I checked the backside, and just as I stuck my head out, I saw an arm come down and hit me on top of the head with a grenade, one of those wood-type grenades. That thing went round and round. He said, "What happened?" I said, "That fool had a grenade. He hit me on top of the head." He said, "Well, see if you can grab his arm." Well, I reached back. I saw him coming. I reached up, and he got me again. I said, "Done got me twice." He said, "Well, try it one more time." Well, I saw him coming down, and he got me the third time. I said, "No more." So we went out the other side. We had a ditch about this deep. We was running that ditch. It went around and come back to a bridge down there. We were shooting silhouettes as we was coming down to that. We didn't ask them who they were. We just shot them. And so we come to this bridge, and there was 61 military people there. I had some captains, a major, some lieutenants, and a bunch of enlisted men. They were under that bridge. Well, right at that bridge was where the 7th Division was supposed to cover us as we came through. Well, when I asked them what was going on, they said they got a machine gun in the middle of the road. They got one on each side of the road. There was no way mountains up this way. You know Korea. And anyway, the only way you're going to get out is go up over the mountains. Well, I knew the mountains because I'd been there before. So I told them, I said, "We'll go up this mountain like this. They won't see us in the dark." So we stretched out in single file going up the mountain. Just as we stretched out, a B-26 came over. "I'm going to throw out flares so you can see how to get out." Well, when those flares lit up, I'm looking at all three of those machine guns. We froze. We lay there for 45 minutes waiting on those things to go out. So I get to the top of the mountain. I told them, I said, "I'm going down on the other side toward the river, the Hong Song River." I said, "I'm going down, and I'll see if that field is open, and we'll try to cross the river." Well, I went down, and just as I stepped out in the field, I heard a shell coming. I fell backwards. It was white phosphorus. It landed all around me. It didn't touch me. You know, burn a hole in you. Anyway, when that all settled, I walked back out, and apparently a wild shell came in. So the cornfield. So anyway, I start back up the mountain to bring them down. And I get about halfway up the mountain. Fire coming toward me. I said, "Oh my, I'm on the wrong side." And I turned loose and went sliding back down the mountain. I had these pockets on my fatigues, just stripped them both off between two trees. Had my cigarettes, all that kind of stuff in it. But anyway, I slipped back up. I said, "What's going on up there?" I said, "Somebody was trying to get up here." I said, "You fools, you're shooting at me. Come on down." Well, we got down and we got to the field, and we had to walk about 100 yards across the field to the river. Well, the river was still frozen, but the ice was broke up, you know. The big old floes about that thick. I told him, I said, "Now jump from one float to the other, but land in the middle, because if you get on the side, it's going to flip you in." Who went in? I was the first one who went in. But somebody grabbed my hand just as soon as I went down. I came up, my clothes were solid ice. But I had two prisoners that I'd gotten with those 61 people. So I took the prisoner and put him in front, and I put my bayonet in his back. And I told him, I said, "Anything happens, and you don't do what I tell you to do," I said, "you're going to feel it on the other side." Well, we were walking along, and the Chinaman was walking along, meeting us in the dark. And he said, I didn't know how to say "no-hama," but apparently he thought I was saying it right, and they just walked right on. So all of a sudden, I heard a machine gun over here breach a machine gun. I gave him a little bunch like that. He must have said the right thing, because I heard him unbreach the machine gun. We kept walking. Well, we got about 2 or 3 more miles on that mountain ridge, and there's a bunch of heads popped up. Says, "Halt! Who goes there?" "Oh," I said, "We're done back. We're back to the troops." And it says, "Advance and be recognized." And I advanced. The lieutenant, he said, "Ah, Martin," said, "I'm glad to see you." I said, I'm glad to see you. I said, why are you glad to see me? He said, we're looking for a way out. I said, I thought I was out. So I lined them up. It was already getting daylight that morning. And we was taking a ridge, a chime on that ridge, about 500 yards each way. And we're on this middle ridge. And I told him, I said, stay in line. We're going to go right on down south. And I said, don't make a move. But I had one guy with a BAR, a Browning automatic. He opened up on the Chinaman. When he did, we started running. They cut him down.
What was your rank at the time?
PFC.
PFC.
Private first class. I turned down a commission 3 times. I would not take it because I didn't plan to stay in the military.
So you escaped out of that?
I'm sorry?
You escaped out of it, right?
It was 4 of us. When I stopped running, it was 4 of us. And we landed in a rice paddy. And I laid back. I hadn't slept in 24 hours. And they had machine guns focused, 5 of them down on us, and they're just breaking the ice all around us. And I just laid back and went to sleep. They looked at me. They woke me up. They said, we got to surrender. I said, don't do that. I said, put a gun on that machine gun, put one on that one on that one. I said, we can at least knock 1 of them out, or 2 of them, or 3 of them. I said, they're going to kill us anyway. I said, if you surrender, they're going to kill you, because I'd seen the pictures where but that was Koreans that did that. This is Chinamen. The Koreans would tie you up and shoot you in the back of your head.
Right.
They were trained by the Japanese. The Chinese, I wasn't aware how they did it. Anyway, finally, after they woke me up, they would not stand up and hold the cloth up or anything. I made them break their guns down, throw them out on the ice, and the body heat melted into the ice. I knew they wouldn't get the stuff right then. They might get in a spring. Anyway, then most of us come over. I sat down on a rock. They had taken most of my stuff off.
So that's the day that you were captured?
That was the first time, yeah.
What is it, February?
That was 13th February, about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. Anyway, I sat down on a rock, and I'm sitting there reading my little New Testament, because I figure I got to have my funeral, you know. And so the Chinaman came over, and he had the black boots on, and he was an officer, and had a gun about that long, and he walks right up and he pokes it right between my eyes. I said, well, go ahead. I said, I've been expecting it. I said, I put myself into this situation. I got no way out. He stood there, it seemed like an hour. Never said a word. Put it back in his holster. He never even spoke to the troops. He left. So then they took me, and the guy beat the ice off of me where I was frozen. And then they asked me to drive trucks.
Drive trucks?
They wanted me to drive some of the trucks that they'd captured up the road. And I refused to drive in a truck. Now, some of them did actually volunteer to do so. But they didn't. I didn't do that. So they moved us 25 miles. Well, first of all, they went south about 5 miles. I thought I was close to getting to the front line, but I still had not gotten close back where they had retreated to. Anyway, we went about 5 miles south, and the next day we started back north. We went 25 miles north, and I don't know the area. I don't know the name of the area.
Right.
But there was 150 of us that they had accumulated into one location. 120 of them were not wounded. There was 28 of them that had been wounded. I had not been wounded. But after we'd been there about 2 weeks, well, it wasn't 2 weeks, because actually the 23rd of February, they decided to move us out and move us north. And I passed out. For what reason, I don't know. I actually see, but I just went limp. And so they picked me up by feet and legs, and I didn't know about these 28 wounded men. They took me and threw me in with them. And when I landed, there was a small room, and I was on top of one, and he was screaming. And I moved around and got him on top of me, and he'd been shot through both shins as a Negro, and I worked with him all night. And so the next day, I started negotiating with, now this is a good part, I started negotiating with the Chinaman. And I asked him, I said, what you trying to do? You got us back here. You sent 120 north. He said, well, I'm trying to figure out what to do with you. Turned out he was a Chinese school teacher. I told you, learned his English under Chiang Kai-shek when our troops were there. And he and I got acquainted fairly well. I said, well, I can tell you what to do. He said, well, what's that? I said, the Geneva Convention. Oh, I've heard about that, but I don't know what it means. I said, well, it's the rules of war. I said, he said, well, what does it say about POWs?
Right.
I said, well, as best I can, now listen, I'm bluffing. I said, the best I can remember, it says that if a man is captured by a foreign country in war, that if that country chooses to release him, he can never fight that country again. Oh, he says, that's logical. Well, I knew that they had no electronic communications, so he went out. He said, I'm going out to verify that. Well, he was gone about 2 hours. He came back. He says, I can't find any verification. Of course, he had no way to do it. But he says, it's logical. I'm going to release these 28 men with you. You're 25 miles from the border or from the troops, and I'm going to give you 3 guards that can't speak English, but they will stay with you, and you'll have 48 hours to get them there. I said, what about something? I need some mules. He went back out. He come back and says, I can't get you any mules. You'll have to walk. Well, I told the guys, I said, we're going to take 2 nights. We'll walk it out. Oh, no, we're going to do it all one night. Well, here I got this Negro that shot through both shins. They wouldn't carry him.
It sounds like a movie. I mean, you made a deal with the Chinese soldier that they're going to release 28 wounded men?
He was an old school teacher, and we just hit it off. We just hit it off. The rest of them wouldn't talk to him. So he and I hit it off, and he let me go, and we started out that evening, and I carried that Negro 12 miles on my back. And he cracked up on me. The ground was frozen hard, because I remember looking down at the ground. We were going through the same area where the massacre took place, and I would see faces in the road where the trucks had run over it, you know, like a rose in a book. The face would be that big. You could see his eye, his mouth, everything. Anyway, when the Negro went down, he rolled the fingers, the meat back on his fingers, hitting the ground, the first joint. I told him, I said, I can knock him out, but I can't carry dead weight. One guy had a blanket. I said, give me the blanket. We'll take some sticks and we'll make a stretcher, but I'll have to have help to carry that. We're not going to do that. He wouldn't give me the blanket. Well, the Chinaman agreed just to leave him laying there. And we marched on to the river. They had a guardhouse right at the river. The bridge had been shot out. They moved us down around on the Chinese side of the river, but their troops were behind us. And our troops was across the river. And it was just before daylight. And so at daylight, I stepped out. I could see the Chinaman back there. Our troops across the river, but the ice is in the water, and everything is probably about this deep across there. And I had a man that took a bullet right through here, come out, just missed his spine. And it had been clotted. That was a fellow by the name of Jack Anderson. He took the bullet through the mouth. It just missed his spine, but he had had it clotted for several days. And when I called him out that morning, he coughed. And when he did, the blood was shooting out of his mouth like my finger. I threw him on the ground, rolled him sideways so he couldn't strangle. He said, I got to have help. I said, well, I'm going to get you a helicopter.
He didn't die of it?
He's still alive.
Oh, my God. You
Anyway,
mean went through the
it
mouth and...
just missed his spine. Went through the mouth and come out.
How can a man survive with that?
I got one, took a bullet right through here. Missed every nerve behind his eye. Lives in New Mexico. But anyway, Jack Anderson, Sergeant Maspern, and another one. I had 28 when I started out. I left the Negro on the road. That left me 27 beside myself. And when I took off after the help to get him out of there with a helicopter, I had another one. His name was Bob Killingworth out of Arkansas, and he volunteered to go with me to get help. And I left the other people there. I said, stay right here till I get back. And so I went up the river. Well, I tried to cross the river, but I couldn't. I went up the river where there was sandbags at the bridge. The water's only about a foot deep, and we had put those in 2 months before that when the bridge was shot out. So anyway, I start running across the bridge on the sandbags, and I'm getting fire from behind. And I was trying to run a little faster, and I looked down, the bullets were just barely missing my legs. I turned around, and there was 2 Chinamen on the bridgehead, and they were shooting M1 rifles. I said, they're not trying to miss us. Hit us, because I said they could hit us good. They just want us to stop. Well, they had 2 there the night before when we came through. I said, well, they'll know who we are, or they'll let us go, you know. So I went back to try to explain it to them. They took us in the guardhouse. One went in, one stayed outside. There was a Korean man and some children there. They kicked him over in the corner. The one did. He kicked him over in the corner. I had a 3-colored ballpoint pen still. I don't know how I maintained it, but I still had it. He saw it. He wanted it. I just held it out like that. I had to take the shirt off and dump it in the floor. Now, some things don't come to you till later. But he went down on all fours to get that pen, but it was only for seconds. And he came up with that, put my shirt back on, pushed me out the door with the other guy. And we went around, and they'd done captured 23 more of them, only leaving 3 where the guy that was shot, in the mouth, and 1 more, and 2 more. They stayed on the spot. Well, the other 23 got captured right there, but we just went around maybe 5 minutes. And just as we got around there, here come one of our jets in and blew that little guardhouse all to pieces. But later on, I'm thinking about it. I had a 6-pound shoe pack. When he went to the floor, I could have took his head off. But if I did, I'd have been there when the shell came into. So I got lucky. But we ran 7 miles as hard as we could run because they started a movement. It's the 24th day of February, forward movement from our troops, and they were just right behind us running. Mm-hmm. And we ran 7 miles to stay out of range of the artillery. And then that's when they turned me over to the North Koreans. That was Chinaman.
When was it?
That was 25th or 26th of February 1951. I went to North Korean headquarters.
Where?
I don't know where it was, but they just told me that's what it was. I don't know the name of the town.
Around
It was
Hongsan?
not too far above the parallel.
Okay.
Or near the parallel.
Why you were turned over to North Koreans?
I have no idea, but I stayed with them a month.
Mm-hmm.
But they moved me backwards and forth across east and west. I had a captain that assigned to me, and that's when they shot several of my prisoners.
How was different from North Koreans? I mean, Chinese and North Koreans.
The North Koreans like Japanese. They had a culture developed of Japanese. In other words, all the telephone systems, all the power plants, everything was built with the Japanese.
More brutal than Chinese.
Oh, well, I won't say brutal. I think they're more merciful. Because if you got where you could not walk, instead of beating you up and stripping your clothes off and leaving you naked to die, they would just shoot you. That was merciful. I watched them shoot them. They couldn't go anywhere. If you left them there, they would just lay there and die in misery. The Chinamen, that's the way they did them. But the Koreans would shoot you, and you got to die immediately. Now, I know people look at it a different way, but if you're at that front and you're suffering like I did.
You think that was merciful?
Oh, yes. I weighed 190 pounds when these people got me. In 100 days, I weighed 90 pounds. And I come to almost to the point where they would have shot me. But I had already gotten to the Chinese. The Chinese, all they did was push you down a hillside, strip your clothes off, and let you freeze to death. That was not merciful. The Chinese are a real cruel people.
Wow, that's very opposite description.
Sure.
What I heard from other Korean, the POW, they say Chinese were much more nicer than North Koreans. North Koreans just shoot them.
Well, but that was good. That was good because just imagine when you have walked and you have not eaten for days and weeks, and the only water you can get is from rice paddies and so forth, and you're suffering every day, and you want to die. You'd rather die than be laying there for hours in agony. I would rather be shot. And they did it just like they did on Bataan. If the people that couldn't make it on Bataan, they killed them immediately. And that was merciful.
Where did you go from there? Did you go to any camp?
Well, when the North Koreans turned me over back to the Chinese, I believe they got it down Suwon, but it was Bean Camp.
Uh-huh.
That was the old Japanese Suwon. That was the old Japanese prison camp, World War II, that they held American troops in. And that was we marched up there. That was from the 25th of February. We got there on April 1st.
You got there April 1st of 1950.
Somewhere close to April the 1st, yeah.
1951.
1951. That was actually an ammunition depot for the Chinamen.
And what happened from there?
Well, that's where they named it Bean Camp because they had a bean ball. They cooked that bean ball down, and you got that in a little cup of the soup off of it once a day. And we had 2 wells in the street. They were only about 10 foot deep, and the water was contaminated real bad. And we were being flown over by the Air Force every day. And then around the 20th or the 21st, somewhere along there, 3 piloted by South Korean pilots on P-51s fired 3 rockets into the camp, killed 90 of our men. We had 750 there. That was an accumulation of prisoners coming from all sorts, all areas. And they killed 90. We had them dying every day. We buried them at night. We did not know where. But anyway, on the 25th, they came around and they said, you have to take a test to see if you're able to travel. And I'm sitting down with, you know how the Koreans sit down, cross his legs. I was good at that. I could raise up and sit down. And you know how that works. But anyway, I could just barely get up. And when I got up, they said, jump up and down 3 times. I managed to get up onto my toes. You passed, they said. I wanted to pass. I did not want to be left there because that place was awful. And, you're going to die if you stayed there, most likely.
Yeah.
So it was 530 of us that actually could leave there. And we had a man.
How many?
530 of us left that morning on the 25th. And the man who came out on a white horse, I think, most all Chinamen named Mr. Lee. But anyway, he came out on a white horse dressed in a beautiful uniform. I graduated Columbia University.
The Chinese guy.
Had Tom McCann shoes on. He said, I'm going to march you to death. He did a pretty good job. We left there with 530. We arrived from the 25th to May the 18th, we arrived with 300. We had lost about 230 of them along the road.
Where did you arrive?
We arrived in Camp 1 or Camp 3, whichever, Changsong.
Camp 2?
Huh?
Camp 2?
Camp 3, Camp 1. They alternated those names. 2 camps, 1 on each side of town in Changsong. Camp 3 on one side, Camp 1 on the other side. But it gets the numbers all confused. But there was already prisoners there that had been captured in December and November of 1950.
Until November 15th?
There was prisoners that were already in this camp at that time when I arrived there in May.
So, tell me about the day, typical day in Camp Changsong.
Well, the first days, of course, you probably heard the stories. We were eat up with lice. I don't know if you ever saw any of those lice, but if you were around any of the poorer areas in Korea, you might have seen them. They look like termites. They're big things. They're about so long, white, and I'd have 1,000 of them on me. And I killed them all day long on the road. And when we got there, the Chinamen came out there and told us to strip all of our clothes off. They had some barrels. We had to put our clothes in those barrels. We built fires around those barrels. We all walked around naked. And we boiled the clothes and killed the lice in the clothes. We went inside, and some kind of stuff, they gave us weeds that we burned inside the rooms, the rock floors. And it smoked, and it killed all the bugs in the rooms. So they made it a little bit more sanitary. And they'd give us 1 tablespoonful of bean oil a day. That was wonderful because we'd never tasted anything that good. But anyway, they fed us on Milo and cracked corn. And about 2-3 months later, they brought us some black bread. We had to cook it steam bread. And I had 1 loaf per man, 300 men up there in that camp. And I had a big stick big as that. And I put it in a tub, and I had to beat them in the head, try to get them down to just take 1, but a bunch of them took 4 or 5. I never got any. And when I found it, they had bamboo rugs, and they'd put them under the rugs and slept on them and mashed them out flat. But the typical day was the indoctrination thing. The first one, you'll enjoy this one, because they made me a squad leader. I didn't want it, but I had to go up that morning to get our lesson for the day. So they gave us a piece of paper and said, they have two questions. It says, who started the war in Korea? Question number one. Question number two, and how come did the Americans do it?
How what?
How come did the Americans do it? Towards the answer to the question was the second one.
How
come did the Americans start the war in Korea? After they asked us who started it in the first question. Then they said, how come did the Americans do it? It's crazy. So I went back laughing about it. And so the indoctrination program proceeded, and I began to object to it. And
how?
Well, first of all, they wanted people to write letters home, telling their people that the Chinese were our friends and that they should support the movements in the United States to stop the war, and the American imperialists should have to leave Korea and all that. And so in the summer of 1951, I still had people who were very thin, and they interrogated me every day. And they came in one time and it said, we want you to go back to your squad and tell all your members to write letters to their homes and tell them that the Chinese were our friends and all that. I went back and I told them, if you write a letter, I'll kill you myself. I said, I'll not stand for not one of you to write a letter. And so they did write. So the next morning, they take the two thinnest men I got, and you know how hot it gets up there in North Korea, and they put them on wood pile. They were out there pulling a saw, and it didn't cut worth a cuss. And I knew what they were doing. They were doing that to punish me. And so finally, about noon, I went over to the Chinaman. I asked them, I says, how can I get those men off? Because I'd already talked to them. They didn't think they'd make it through the day. They said, if you'll write us an article about the signing of the unilateral peace treaty with Japan by the United States in September 1951, if you'll write us a letter objecting to that, the Chinese and the Russians were not invited to be in that peace treaty, if you'll write us a favorable objection to that, 300 words, said, we'll get them off the woodpile. I said, well, can I have one man to help me? They said, yes. I had to write 300 words, and that was about noon. Well, they let them off the woodpile, but I had one man who was from Nebraska State University who was in the education department, and he knew the language a lot better than I did. And so what I did, I had him come in. I said, now I'm going to write this article just the opposite to what they want, but I'm going to have to write about 900 words. I want you to convert it into 5-syllable words. I said, they won't understand a word that you got on there. It worked. I turned it in that afternoon, and they called for roll call. And the first thing they said, Martine, he has seen the light. He is now one of us. They gave me a beer. They gave me some cigarettes.
I don't understand. Even though it's been converted with a different language, but still
It wasn't a different language. I only had different added syllables. You see, like I wrote 1 and 2 and 3 syllable words, I had him convert the wordage that I had to 5 and more syllables. Therefore, the language was more difficult to understand. So you can turn language into many syllables if you know your synonymous reading of the English language. You can take a 2-syllable word and take a sentence and make 5 syllables.
So basically, you wrote the opposite of what you are told.
Right.
So, and ask your friend. Hold on. Ask your friends to convert that vocabulary into a difficult vocabulary so that the Chinese would not understand.
Right. And they bought it tooth and toenail. They were tickled to death with it. So they sent it to Shanghai. It was to be in the Shanghai News. In about 2 weeks, they treated me so good, I was just the best person they ever knew. So I come in one evening, and I'd just been working in the woods and hauling wood. And a little Chinaman walked up to me, and he said, Martine, we take you, said, grab your everything. We take you to a better place. They put me in jail. They had 13 others in there with me. And
where in Camp 3?
Right in the middle of town in Changsong. The mule skinners that worked for them was in the next room to me. and they treated them mule skinners bad. But in any case, they locked up 14 of us in there, and they promised us that we'd never come out of there.
Why? Do they find it out?
That's the way it happened. What it was, they called me in first before we actually did that. Says, you think you fooled the Chinese volunteers?
Right.
He said, we got it right there. Said it came back, and said that letter you wrote said it was wrong too. And that's when they locked me up. And so we stayed there till December. Well, in December, they brought the London Daily Worker in about once a week and let us see it. In December of 1951, they had released the names of all the prisoners of war at Parmesan, in the peace talks. Admiral Joy and all of them were talking on this. And they had released all our names. They had actually released all 14 of our names.
Mm-hmm.
They came in immediately and took us back and put us in the camps. But they divided my group. They called us the worst bunch, 9 of us. They put us in a separate squad and told us that we could not influence or talk to the rest of them. And so there was 600 there. Well, that was December 15, 1951.
December 15th?
Mm-hmm. And so every day or two, night, they were taking me out and interrogating me. Said, you know all about biological weapons and all that sort of thing. And they claimed that I was a colonel and I was lying about my position and all that. And in other words, they were seeking information that they thought I could give them, which I didn't do. And some of it I didn't know, and all that sort of thing. So in any case, it went on with those interrogations until May of 1952.
Oh, by the way, how many were in Jangsong camp? 600?
There was about 600 at that time. They had been different numbers. They had the British troops there, the 5th Brigade. They had them there. They moved them to Camp 5. And we had the Negroes, a good many of them there. They moved them to Camp 5. But in May of 1952, we had about 600 of the American prisoners there.
Okay. And then?
And then in May of 1952, I had one of their ones that worked with them in their what they called a study group, studying socialism, communism. He slept right beside him.
What do you mean, study group among the POW?
Right. Have you heard anything about that?
No. How is it happening?
Oh, they had, at night, they treated them real good. They'd come and sit down and they studied Marx and Engels.
What do you mean they? Who?
The ones that volunteered to be in the study groups. These were the people who were collaborating with the Chinamen on socialism, teaching of socialism in their camps. See, they were trying to convert the POWs to socialistic policy, which they could easily bleed it into the labor unions in the United States and saying that you were sent here as cannon fodder by the wealthy people who owned all the big plants that made the ammunition supplies and so forth. A lot of them bought it, and they went along with it.
How many were there in Jangsong? How many groups?
There's only one big group, and they had their Chinese interpreters that taught that group. It met right in the center of the camp. I was not allowed to go to that area, but I knew about it. But this guy, he was a member of it, and he actually was playing both sides, helping me out. And as a matter of fact, sort of my spy into their group. He was only 17 years old. He went over when he was 16. And anyway, he came in that night, and just before the end of May, he says, tomorrow morning, there'll be 4 red flags out there. And says they're going to line you all up, and you're going to march behind those flags. And Frank Knowles, you've heard of him? AP correspondent. He was captured sometime in 1950. And he had been in Camp 5, and AP had sent him a set of cameras in 1952 to take these pictures for them. And he arrived down there that day, and my little 9 people disagreed. We were not going to march behind the flags. And they brought the whole power force out, all their leaders and everything, trying to force us to do that.
How many were in the one group that actually collaborating with Chinese? How many were there?
You mean the ones that were really active, the ones that were really playing ball with them seriously?
Mm-hmm.
To me, give you a number I couldn't exactly do because I was interwoven with Camp 5, Camp 3, Camp 2, and so forth, because they had their own plants that they put in to get information from the ones of us who opposed them. Sometimes I didn't know which was which. They had 25 to 30 that were really bought, that were sold on the socialistic policy. And to be honest with you, it went back to the United States after the war was over.
Went back to?
Yeah, they started the protest movements, and which actually culminated with Martin Luther King and all that sort of thing. They were a part of that. Some of these actual prisoners of war that were.
So that's the people who actually bought that idea. But what about others who just joined? How many?
I couldn't exactly give you a number because it fluctuated. Sometimes you'd know who was, and sometimes you didn't know who was, and it wasn't publicized as to who was doing what.
Okay.
A lot of them denied what they were doing. As a matter of fact, you talk to a lot of these right here today, they'll say, "Oh, I was a reactionary." Ask him to define the word reactionary. He doesn't even know.
Yeah. So Frank came to take a picture of that parade?
On May the 1st, May Day 1952, and the communists will celebrate that day. But May Day, actually in our schools, when I went to schools, it was just a little program that we did. We had no idea it had anything to do with any kind of politics.
So Frank actually took the picture?
Oh, yeah, and they got published.
Took the picture of the parade that who bought the idea of socialism?
Well, the technical way this happened, that guy told me the night before. I alerted my other 8 that we were not going to march. And we sat down out in front of the building when they blew the whistle, and they didn't allow us to have an excuse. I sent to headquarters to get an excuse. They wouldn't give it to me. So when we wouldn't come out, the 600 fell out when they blew the whistle. Mm-hmm. They're lined up in 4 columns. I look up the street, and they got the 4 flags up way up the end of the street in front of them. Mm-hmm. I didn't know Frank made the pictures right then. He got the pictures with all 4 columns standing behind it. But we were sitting down here, and they were trying to make us get into the column. Mm-hmm. We refused it. Mm-hmm. Did I tell you how it all happened?
No.
Oh, okay. When it happened, they caught my SWAT leader, and they put him in what, you know, the potato hole where you have it, dig a hole, and you got the framework over the dirt over it and everything, and water gets down there. They threw him in thinking that they had the one that was leader. Well, they came back. We had this Marine. He was strutting around, and they took him and threw him in the hole. Actually, I'm the one that's instigating this whole thing. And they're trying to prove that if they could find the leader, it'd break it up, you see. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they threw him in the hole, and they came back. Well, what you going to do? We all said, and I had them all speak at the same time. I said, we will not march behind red flag.
Yeah.
What will you do? I said, you take the flags down, we'll march. So they took them down. And we marched to the parade field. And we got to the parade field, and they had a platform made for the commander of the camp, and he had an Englishman who was going to be the MC. So the Englishman got up, and he was going to tell a joke. So he got up, and he says, there was 3 men who died, said they went to heaven. And said, St. Peter asked the first one, said, who are you? He says, I'm an American. He said, well, come on in. He says, we got a good place for you. And the next one said, who are you? He said, I'm an Englishman. Oh, well, we've got a beautiful place fixed for you, too. So the third one got up. He said, who are you? He says, I'm a Chinaman. He said, well, you'll have to go back below. He said, we don't serve rice and kimchi up here. And that's when the commander had it interpreted to him, and they had him drug off the stage. Well, we jumped up chanting. Everybody started chanting, bring him back, bring him back. And we walked off the parade field and never punished one of us.
Oh.
That was the end of the day. And that, you know, you talk to these guys, and as many as there were there, I've only talked to about 2 of them that remember that. That was a big event. That was international. That went into papers all over the world, especially communist papers. See, the London Daily Worker, the New York Daily Worker. So we had
New York Daily Work?
The New York Daily Worker. That was a communist newspaper out of New York. we had a magazine called Masters in Mainstream. That came out in New York. William Z. Foster was the president of the National Communist Party in the United States. Howard Fast was the writer. He's the one that wrote Spartacus. He wrote quite a number of novels, and he was a communist who wrote articles in Masters in Mainstream that they gave us. They made me librarian before I finally finished up over there.
Yeah.
I studied all those books.
What was the most difficult thing for you to stay there?
Dealing with the indoctrination program. Of course, the health thing, I was able to deal with that because I spent most of my time trying to keep the others alive. I never had time to do anything about myself. I was crazy. I had so many die after working so hard with them. It was really depressing. But the hardest thing was to find that my people knew so little about politics and were so easily misinformed.
Why do you think this happened to you? How do you put all these things into perspective, looking back all those years? Why did it happen to you? How do you understand it?
Well, I'm going to put it to you this way. I was captured the first time. If I'd have stayed where I belonged, I'd have been home. But for one man who took that bullet, I spent 2 years and a half in a prison camp. The two men I left with him that actually got out, he put them in for Silver Stars. He wrote a book. He lived in Everett, Washington. 50 years later, I'd been trying to find him. I was in Portland, Oregon. I put my name on a list. He found it, but he didn't remember who it was. But he saw I was a POW. He sent me a letter. Do you want to buy my book? I sent him the money right away. He sent me the book. He'd taken a newspaper clipping out where he had gotten home in March of 1951. And in the book, he wrote, I led an escape. And these poor enlisted men, we felt sorry for them and let them go with us. So I had a convention in Spokane, Washington. So I called him. I said, you're going to be there. Anyway, I finally went to his house over in Everett, Washington. But I had my debriefing, which was 165 pages, that took 2 years to accomplish. When I came back, I took it with me out there. And it specifically said that he had been released with 28 prisoners of war that I had gotten out by talking that Chinaman into the Geneva Convention. And the only thing he looked at me and said, he said, I want to thank you for proving to me that I did not escape. Now, if I'd have wrote a book like that, I'd have called them all back.
Do you have the report?
Not with me.
Yeah, I know, but you have it home?
Oh, yes. See, they didn't give it to me until 1998 under the Freedom of Information Act, but there's still a lot of it blacked out. Yeah, I was so active politically. I knew politics. I studied government. I studied martial law.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I had all the martial law books before I left to go over there. These guys didn't know they were committing treason. Anytime you did something, you don't have the option when you're in the military to speak detrimentally against your president.
Right.
He is commander-in-chief. He is your chief officer.
Yeah.
You can't say things or sign petitions. They signed petitions against the United States. We had a prisoner of war whose daddy was down in Louisiana, Mississippi, who owned a big rice plantation. His name was Perry. I believe that's the way it was. He sent a petition over there that I fought them to keep them from signing. That's one reason they locked me up in jail the second time. But in any case, you see, politics was the biggest thing about this war. You see, World War I, we fought over real estate. World War II, we fought over real estate. The Japanese wanted infrastructure. The Germans wanted infrastructure. World War Korea, we fought politics. And also in Vietnam. I did a broadcast between those two wars on radio, which never got nowhere. And they asked me what my prediction was. I said the Chinese will enter that war before we ever have a chance to win. They actually did. That wasn't publicized. But the Chinese entered that war. So in any case, I knew martial law. Military law. I knew all of this. And I tried to tell the people not to do it. They signed those petitions. And that was wrong. Now, what happened when I came back, I was a minority. and they declared me a subversive, my own government.
This is the last reunion of ex-POW Association. What do you feel?
Well, it's not going to be the last. It'll be the last of its type.
Yeah.
Because we got to ride home. I'm a director in that from the state of South Carolina, and we've been active for 12 years on that. And we take the POWs there from anywhere, and pay their motel rooms and take care of them registration. They don't have to pay anything but get themselves there. And we do that. We're going to continue that, and that's why we got our representatives here today. The first time I attended one of those things, and I told them, I said, it feels like I just came home from Korea. I said, because I landed in San Francisco, and I was treated like a dog from the time I got off on the docks until I got home. I wasn't even allowed to speak to the press, and I had to ride a train. I was supposed to fly home. And they paid me my pay. I had $3,700 for 3 years. And so I became very bitter against my country. And I'm still very bitter at the way it's going now, because we're going that way. You see, it's like the communists. They get up and give us these speeches. The American imperialists controlled 2/3 of the world's monetary gold. At that time, it was $36 billion at $34 an ounce. Today, we don't have $36 billion worth at $1,300 an ounce. We're losing that power. We control the world's money market for the last 70 years. Right now, China, Russia, India, and Argentina are trying to take it over. If we lose that, this country was built on dollars, capital. They hate capitalism. And one time, I don't know if you know this or not, but Jimmy Burns is from South Carolina. He used to be the Secretary of State under Franklin Roosevelt. And one day they were interrogating me, said, "You're like Jimmy Burns." I said, "You couldn't have honored me any greater."
Yeah. What is Korea to you?
Well, Korea is probably about 2/3 of my life.
What is it?
It occupies every hour of every day, because I saw it with a civilization that was actually 3,000 years behind. I lived in it, and I also lived with the communists in it. It gave me an education that I couldn't get anywhere else. I think it would be great if everybody had to go through what I did, because it'd make them appreciate a heck of a lot more of what they got. But I think it actually built something in me that makes me want to defend freedom with much more zest than I did when I went there, because I hated communism when I went there, and I hate it even worse today. And I look at it as being the actual result of what this country will be if it progresses as it is now. We have no other source. I mean, no other. If we can't win that election in November of 2014 and get a more balanced situation in our Congress and our Senate to overcome our executive officer for the next 2 years, we're down the drain.
What is wrong with President Obama now?
He's a socialist, and he's also Islamic, and he has a false birth certificate. He is totally unqualified. He never served the first day in the military, and now he's commander-in-chief over the whole entire thing, and he's taken over a country where he had absolutely no business experience. He's totally unqualified.
There are presidents who didn't serve in the army at all, or somebody who was this owl, didn't serve. They were supposed to be in the army, but they didn't.
But I'll have to say that George Bush, I didn't like him because he actually did not commit to his service record. General Eisenhower did his job. The first George Bush was shot down in the Pacific.
Yeah.
He did his job. And that should be one of the qualifications to be in the military before you ever got into a senatorial or congressional seat or a presidential seat or in a high-ranking position. Know something about the defense of the country.
What is wrong with the socialism? Tell me. Tell them.
What's wrong with socialism?
Yeah. What is the...
It takes away your individual right. This country was individualism. Henry Ford was an individualist.
Yep.
He built that company himself. I built my supermarket. I built my 5 businesses myself from making dollars and reinvesting it. It was not a cooperative. It was not a collective thing. It was an individual. And we as individuals are supposed to run this country. And Obama's opposed to individual.
Based on individual freedom that you cannot exchange with any other value.
That's right.
That's the message that you want to leave.
And your Japanese and your Chinese, your Koreans that have been successful over there were total individuals who built what you have. Of course, there was help given, but they took advantage of it. It took an individual. When something's offered, it takes an individual to take that offer and move with it. And
that is the main credo of big L liberalism.
And have the guts to stand up and stand up for a principle. If you don't stand for something, you are worthless in this community. I stood for America as a prisoner of war and was never given any credit for it.
Have you been back to Korea?
No, and I don't want to go.
You don't want to go. Why not?
Well, what I would see over there would not be what I know. Unless I could go to North Korea, and if I did, I wouldn't come back. I would be like that guy that they got just recently, volunteered to go over there. Is about my age, but they would have returned me to the Chinese if I'd have went.
Do you know what happened to South Korea after you left?
I watched it in the news. I watched it develop, and it's fascinating. I never believed it could happen. I really never believed the people. I knew they were industrious. I knew that, but how could you do it so fast? How could you develop such an economy so fast? But you did it capitalistically and individualistically.
Do you believe in God?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe in God?
Absolutely. That's the only reason I'm here. I never went through all these things had it not been so. That there was a guardian angel. I was run over with an 18-wheeler, both legs, and left on the side of the road in 1989. And they didn't think I'd survive that one.
No, it's hard to put all those miseries and agonies and unimaginable sufferings into a perspective for me, but I find that you guys who went through all this are much closer to God than anybody else.
Absolutely.
That's one thing I'm finding now.
You find that we reach. Well, let me give you an example of something that most people never have the opportunity to learn. When you're out here in the public, like in the United States, you have bars, you have nightclubs, and you have the association with people in different groups and so forth. And you got people that, oh, he's bad, he's dangerous and all that sort of thing. And then you got this little guy over here, he's quiet. But when you get people into a position like this, prisoners of war, and you strip them, and there's only a body left, they have absolutely nothing. You see their bare soul.
Yeah.
And you see some of the toughest people that you thought were tough back there, they're worse than little mice. They're meek. And you see that little guy who was meek to be the toughest guy that would be right there with you. But you see the bare soul. I was able to do this when I first came back. I played a lot of chess when I was in Korea. And I learned how to assess IQs by playing chess and so forth. But anyway, by learning and seeing the bare souls of people, it made it where I could come back here and do it here. And I was disappointed in a lot of people that I used to have confidence in. And having that experience was an education in itself.
Thank you, T.J. Martin. So good to have you, and I want to thank you for what you did.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. If it has any benefit for anyone in this world, I will not take credit for it, but will be thankful.